If you really want to understand, I mean, feel the kind of political cruelty that defined the medieval world, you need this one image. Picture it. 1180 AD, Constantinople.
Right. You're stepping into this vast cathedral, probably the Hagia Sophia. I mean, it's immense. The stone just goes up and up, almost impossibly high.
Yeah, and the air is just thick, isn't it? Incense, maybe the smell of damp stone, hundreds of courtiers crammed in, all silk and sweat.
And right there, in the middle of it all, you're looking at this tiny figure, an 8-year-old girl, Agnes of France.
Standing on that cold marble, she's got this crown on, miniature, sure, but heavy. You can see the strain on her neck, apparently set with these Black Sea pearls.
And the ring, that's the detail that always gets me. It's huge on her finger, a woman's ring, gold just sliding around in her little hand. One historian described it perfectly, heavy as a shackle.
Heavy as a shackle, an 8-year-old, born a princess in France, and now, just like that, she's Empress of Byzantium. Her childhood, gone. Her say in anything, vanished the moment that ring slid on.
And that image, that single moment, that's really what anchors our deep dive today.
So our mission here is to use the sources we have, the ones detailing this one, frankly, tragic life. It's a story of survival, yeah, but also immense suffering, political games played across continents to really get at the brutal mathematics of medieval political marriage.
Exactly. We're looking at a system where a royal child, especially a girl, her value was purely strategic. Alliances, land, power, that's it.
So today we're going to unpack the whole story. We'll look at the motives, why France and Byzantium even did this, the intense, sometimes really strange cultural training Agnes had to go through.
And the context. This glittering, decaying empire she was sent to, and then the speed, the terrifying speed of how things fell apart, leading to her second marriage at age 12, to a man in his 60s, a man who was basically the definition of ruthless ambition.
It's a stark reminder of how one small life could be just completely swallowed by the gears of empire. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with the why. Why send an 8-year-old thousands of miles away? We need to look west first, at France. Agnes, born around 1171, daughter of King Louis VII and Adele of Champagne, she wasn't just a princess, she was, from birth, a political piece on the board.
Absolutely. And to understand why Louis VII would make such a move, you have to understand the shadow hanging over his reign. He was, well, arguably one of the most strategically squeezed kings in French history.
Squeezed is putting it mildly. He was haunted by failure.
Right.
His second crusade wasn't exactly a success.
No, and even more pressingly, by his disastrous first marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine. When that ended, she didn't just go away quietly. Oh, no.
She married Henry II of England, Louis's biggest rival.
Exactly. And that marriage wasn't just personal. It created a geopolitical monster, the Angevin Empire.
Right, the Angevin Empire. We hear the name, but sometimes forget what it actually meant on the ground. This wasn't just England.
Not at all. You're talking Normandy, Brittany, Aquitaine, Gascony.
Yeah.
Basically, Henry II and Eleanor controlled more of France than Louis VII did. Imagine looking at a map. 2/3 of what he considered his kingdom was under the thumb of his ex-wife and her new husband.
So he's effectively surrounded. His kingdom is like this island battered by Plantagenet waves on almost every side.
It's a constant threat. The fear wasn't just losing a battle, it was total absorption, being wiped off the map by the English crown.
Okay, so viewed that way, the Byzantine marriage suddenly looks less like some exotic adventure and more like an act of sheer desperation.
It was a strategic Hail Mary, basically. Louis needed to break out of that encirclement. He needed leverage. An alliance with the powerful, prestigious, and crucially distant Byzantine Empire could do that.
How so? What's the mechanism there?
It creates a counterweight. It signals to the world, and especially to England, that France isn't isolated. It has powerful friends. It might even open up the possibility, however remote, of a second front, something to distract English resources and attention away from France. Okay. So it's diplomatic maneuvering on a grand scale. And Agnes, she's the guarantee, the living embodiment of this new pact.
She's the price tag, she's the collateral. Her life, her future, traded for a strategic advantage for a bit of breathing room against the Angevin giant.
Wow. It really does just boil down to that cold calculation. But okay, turn the coin over. Byzantium. Why did they want this alliance with a relatively weaker, distant Western kingdom? They had their own grandeur, their own problems.
They certainly did. Emperor Manuel Ucumnenos, the one who started these talks, was a brilliant ruler, but he knew the empire was, let's say, magnificent but fragile. Yeah. Structurally unsound, maybe.
What were the main pressures?
Well, externally, the big one was the Seljuk Turks on the eastern frontier, a constant grinding threat that drained resources and manpower. But internally, things were also fraying.
Like what?
Provincial governors were getting too powerful, acting like independent lords. The central authority from Constantinople was weakening its grip on the provinces, and maybe even more fundamentally, the economy was being bled dry.
By whom? The Italian maritime republics. Venice, Genoa, Pisa. Over years, they'd been granted huge trading concessions. They basically controlled Byzantine commerce by this point.
So Italian merchants were dominating the trade routes, even within the empire itself.
Pretty much. They controlled the lucrative spice trade, luxury goods. Byzantine merchants were often reduced to just supplying raw materials. The Italians were reaping the profits. Manuel saw an alliance with France, a powerful non-maritime Western power, as a way to perhaps counterbalance the Italians, gain some diplomatic leverage, maybe even get some military help against the Turks.
It's complex. Both sides desperately needed something the other could offer, even if it was just the idea of support.
Exactly. And the negotiations reflected this. They happened in Paris at the royal palace on the Ile de la Cité. The Byzantines knew they had to make an impression.
Show off the imperial wealth.
Oh, absolutely. They pulled out all the stops. Their advantage wasn't military might against France. It was sheer dazzling wealth. The sources talk about gifts designed to just overwhelm the French court, silk textiles that, shimmered like nothing seen in the West, spices that filled the palace with exotic scents.
And books, right. Illuminated manuscripts.
Yes, manuscripts illuminated with so much gold leaf they practically glowed. It was pure spectacle, a way of saying, look who you're dealing with. We are still the center of the civilized world.
All this splendor exchanged for a little girl. The betrothal itself, Agnes was only 7.
7 years old, and the ceremony, it was, well, bizarre by modern standards. No groom present, just Agnes standing next to Byzantine ambassadors who are acting as proxies for the boy emperor Alexios.
And that miniature crown they put on her head. The sources say it literally made her neck bow forward. The weight of expectation made physical.
It's a powerful image. And then there's the legal side. Canon law, church law technically required her consent.
Consent from a 7-year-old? How does that even work?
It doesn't, really. It was pure theater, a formality. Asking a child that age if she agrees to marry an emperor she's never met in a land she's never seen. It's meaningless. A total mockery of the idea of consent.
Her fate was sealed, signed, stamped, delivered, an asset ready for transfer.
The ink dried on the parchments, the gifts were formally accepted, and Agnes's life belonged to geopolitical strategy.
So the deal is done. Agnes is officially betrothed. What happens next? Did she just pack her bags?
Oh, hardly. That last year in France, probably around age 7 turning 8, it wasn't childhood anymore. It was an intense, systematic crash course, the goal. To erase as much of her French-Latin identity as possible and mold her into something resembling a Byzantine empress.
So it's like political engineering through education.
Exactly. It was crucial for the alliance. The Byzantines were famously proud, often suspicious of Westerners, Latins as they called them. Agnes had to arrive not just as a princess, but as someone who could, at least superficially, fit into their incredibly complex court culture.
If she failed to adapt,
it would be a disaster. It would reflect badly on her father, on France. It could give ammunition to anti-Western factions in Constantinople, and there were plenty who wanted to sabotage the alliance. So the pressure was immense.
Okay, what did this transformation involve? Language must have been huge.
Absolutely central. Greek tutors were sent directly from Constantinople. Imagine this little girl in Paris, maybe it's winter, wind rattling the windows, and she's inside drilling Greek grammar.
That sounds intense. Byzantine Greek wasn't simple.
Not at all. She's learning complex verb conjugations, tonal shifts completely different from French. The sources suggest she found it really difficult, frustrating, but it was non-negotiable. She had to be able to communicate, even if, as it turned out, she always retained something of a foreign accent.
An accent that would mark her out later.
Definitely. It was a constant reminder of her foreignness in those elite circles. But language was just the start. There was a whole physical side of things, etiquette.
How different was Byzantine court etiquette from French?
Worlds apart, Western courts, even royal ones, were relatively rough and ready compared to the East. Byzantine protocol demanded this incredible, almost inhuman level of formality and restraint.
Like what specifically?
Well, learning to eat correctly, not just using utensils, but specific golden utensils with precise, slow, deliberate movements, learning how to walk. There was a specific way imperial women were expected to move this Measured dignity, the sources call it.
Measured dignity sounds exhausting.
It meant maintaining rigid posture, often for hours, during incredibly long ceremonies or functions. No slouching, no fidgeting, and even how she spoke.
Her voice.
Yes, imperial women were expected to speak in whisper soft tones. It wasn't just about being polite, it was about projecting a very specific kind of controlled, demure power, basically learning to take up space without making noise.
Wow. Okay, language, etiquette. What else? Religion must have been a minefield.
Oh, the biggest minefield of all. This was perhaps the most critical part of her preparation, and the trickiest. The theological gap between Western Latin Christianity and Eastern Orthodoxy was enormous and deeply political.
So her French priests had to teach her about Orthodox beliefs. How did they handle that delicately?
With extreme care. They had to explain the differences without implying the Orthodox way was wrong because that would offend their new allies, but also without suggesting the Latin way she grew up with was heretical. It required incredible diplomatic skill.
And the core issue was the filioque, right? That famous clause.
That's the heart of it. It sounds so abstract to us now, maybe. This disagreement over whether the Holy Spirit proceeds from God the Father alone, as the Orthodox believed, or from the Father and the Son filioque, as the West had added to the Nicene Creed.
Just a few words, but a massive source of friction.
Huge. For the Byzantines, that Western addition wasn't just wrong, it was heresy, an unauthorized tampering with sacred tradition, an insult. Agnes, coming from the filioque side, had to understand this deeply sensitive issue.
And it wasn't just about understanding the theology, was it? It was about practice.
Exactly. She had to learn the Orthodox rituals, how to make the sign of the cross the Orthodox way right to left, how to venerate icons properly, which ones were important, recognizing saints like St. Basil or St. John Chrysostom, who were central to Orthodoxy, but maybe less emphasized in the West.
Because if she messed up religiously,
the whole alliance could be jeopardized. She could easily be painted as this Latin heretic, a foreign contaminant in the heart of the Holy Empire. Anti-alliance factions would seize on any mistake.
so her religious education wasn't really about personal faith. It was political risk management.
That's a good way to put it. Less about piety, more about performance. Ensuring she didn't commit some theological faux pas that could blow up in everyone's faces. It was about making her look convincingly orthodox enough to be accepted.
All right, so after this year of intense, frankly weird preparation, Agnes is ready, or as ready as an 8-year-old can be. She sets off. This journey must have been epic.
Absolutely epic, and probably terrifying. We're talking thousands of miles in the 12th century. Think about that. Very few decent roads, unpredictable weather, bandits. It was a massive undertaking.
And psychologically, leaving behind everything she knew.
Immense. She travels through France, familiar territory, but then into the Alps. The sources mention snow falling even in May up there, then down into Italy, seeing these ancient Roman ruins, maybe the first hint that even the greatest empires don't last forever.
A bit of foreshadowing there, but the really bad part, according to the sources, was the sea voyage.
Yeah, the crossing from Venice to Constantinople, it's specifically called particularly traumatic.
Why traumatic? Storms?
Vicious Mediterranean storms. For a girl who'd likely never been on anything bigger than a river barge, it must have been hellish. The sources describe the galley being tossed around like a child's toy.
Seasickness.
Rampant. The noise, the chaos, the ship pitching violently, people being sick everywhere. The source mentions the sounds of retching. Agnes herself was apparently incapacitated for 3 days in her cabin, barely able to keep anything down.
What a welcome to her new life. Just pure physical misery.
A brutal introduction to the scale and maybe the indifference of the world she was entering, but then, finally, after weeks of travel, they'd see it. Constantinople.
Emerging from the mist, maybe. The legendary city.
And even in decline, it must have been breathtaking. Nothing in Western Europe could compare. Forget the stone castles of France. This was marble, gold, domes catching the sunlight. A city sprawling over 7 hills.
The glittering spider, as it was sometimes called.
A fitting name. And the harbor. The Golden Horn. Just imagine the activity, not just local boats, but ships from everywhere. Venetian galleys unloading spices, Genoese ships with metals and furs. It looked like the center of the world.
And the imperial palace complex itself. How did that compare to, say, a French royal residence?
Again, totally different philosophy. French castles, built for defense. Thick walls, small windows, very functional. The Great Palace in Constantinople was built to impress, to awe.
How so?
Sprawling courtyards, marble columns, intricate mosaics everywhere, fountains, aviaries. It was designed for pleasure and spectacle. Our source calls it magnificent vulnerability. The statement wasn't, we can defend ourselves. It was, we are so grand, we don't need to.
Magnificent vulnerability. That's a key phrase, isn't it? Because behind all that glitter, the reality was different.
Exactly. The timing of their arrival around 1179 was just terrible. They arrived to find an empire already rotting from within.
And the most immediate sign of that rot.
The man who orchestrated the whole marriage, Emperor Manuel Comnenus, was dead, gone. He'd been the strong hand holding things together.
And his successor.
His son, Alexios II. The boy Agnes was supposed to marry, who was, as the source bluntly puts it, barely old enough to hold a sword, let alone run an empire teetering on the edge.
So Agnes arrives in this dazzling city, destined to be empress, only to find the emperor is dead and his heir is a child barely older than she is.
Precisely. The splendor was real, the wealth was still visible, but the power, the stability that Manuel represented, that was gone. She'd arrived at a beautiful, gilded, dying empire. #tag4, the child empress and the lurking threat, first marriage.
Okay, so Agnes is in Constantinople. Emperor Manuel is dead. What's her first meeting like with the boy she's actually supposed to marry, Alexios II?
It happens in the Great Palace, probably in the main throne room, a space designed, again, to make the emperor look almost godlike.
But the reality was less impressive.
Oh, deeply poignant, really. Alexios is sitting on this massive ancient throne, the throne of Constantine, but he's so small that sources make a point of saying his feet were dangling several inches above the ground.
Oh, wow. Just a little kid swallowed by the imperial papal robes.
Exactly. The clothes are pooling around him. He looks completely lost, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all.
And the introduction. Do they, talk?
Not really. It's all scripted. Both children had been coached to recite specific Greek phrases. They apparently didn't even make eye contact. They were just focused on the officials standing nearby, prompting them. Pure political theater. Two kids playing roles they didn't understand.
And the wedding itself, that followed soon after.
Very quickly, back in the Hagia Sophia. And for Agnes, it must have been utterly bewildering. The Orthodox ceremony is so different from the Latin Mass she would have known. So much complex symbolism.
Like the crowns, the Stephana.
Yes, those golden crowns they place on the bride and groom's heads, linked by a single ribbon, symbolizing their spiritual union. Beautiful, but probably meaningless to an 8-year-old.
And physically uncomfortable too, apparently. The sources say her crown kept slipping over her eyes.
Right. And Alexios, beside her, looking pale, maybe swaying a bit. He was already showing signs of the chronic illness that would kill him just a few years later.
The whole atmosphere sounds surreal. The music too, right? Different from Western church music.
Very different. More chanting, maybe haunting flutes, rhythmic castanets.
Yeah.
It created this otherworldly feeling, like stepping into a dream or maybe a nightmare, depending on how you look at it.
Meanwhile, outside the cathedral walls, the otherworldly empire was crumbling.
In very real ways. Economically, it was stretched thin, years of warfare, lavish diplomacy like those gifts to France, and frankly, internal corruption and bribery had drained the treasury. Militarily, they were struggling to hold on to territory, even relatively close by in Anatolia.
So ceremony and tradition were still strong, but the actual power was ebbing away.
Precisely. And the emperor's health was a visible symbol of that decay. Alexios' illness wasn't hidden. People heard his coughing fits echoing down the palace corridors. The sources even mentioned details like spatters of blood on silk handkerchiefs being quickly hidden away by attendants.
Grim. And Agnes's role in all this, empress yes, but still a child.
It's a bizarre juxtaposition. One minute, she might be playing with her ivory dolls, which were apparently quite elaborate, like miniature courtiers themselves. The next, she's sitting by her sick husband's bedside. Two children caught in this web, neither really grasping the enormous political stakes swirling around them.
States they were being manipulated by one figure in particular?
Yes, the shadow looming over the whole scene. Andronikos Komnenos, the emperor's cousin.
Even at the wedding, people were aware of him.
Oh, absolutely. He was there, a man in his late 50s, nearly 60, striking figure, known for his charm, his intelligence, but also his ruthlessness. He'd spent decades in and out of exile for rebellions, plots, scandalous affairs, a real, larger-than-life, dangerous character.
And he's watching this child wedding.
The sources say his dark eyes followed the ceremony with calculating intensity. He wasn't there to celebrate, he was there to assess, to measure the weakness of the boy on the throne and plan his own move.
He'd returned to Constantinople not to serve the child emperor.
But to eventually replace him. And the atmosphere around him, it seems, was already one of fear. Servants stiffening when he walked past, courtiers falling silent. Even the palace cats, one source claims, would slink away. He radiated menace.
So, as Alexios gets weaker, the power vacuum grows.
Inevitably. Courtiers are smart. They see the writing on the wall. They start spending less time paying respects to the dying boy emperor and more time subtly trying to curry favor with Andronikos, the obvious successor or potential usurper.
And Agnes, does she see this shift?
She sees it, yes. Children often notice things adults miss, that clarity of childhood observation. She would have seen the courtiers changing behavior, the whispers, the averted gazes when Alexios entered a room.
But she couldn't interpret it.
Exactly. She lacked the political sophistication, the context, to understand that these weren't just random changes in mood. These were the signs of an impending coup. She was watching the pieces move on the board, unaware that the game was about to end in checkmate, with her as one of the captured pieces.
Okay, so Alexios II is clearly dying. Andronikos Komnenos is circling. How does he make his move, especially regarding Agnes?
It's chillingly calculated. As Alexios weakens, Andronikos becomes this constant, almost spectral presence in the palace. Moving like smoke, one source says, he starts paying very specific attention to Agnes.
Why her? She has no real power.
But she has legitimacy. Or rather, she represents the link to the legitimate dynasty. Andronikos is a Komnenos, yes, but he's still a usurper. Marrying Agnes, the Dowager Empress, even though she's just a child, gives his coup a thin veneer of continuity. It connects him, symbolically, to the previous regime.
So he needs her as a political prop. How does he approach her?
Masterfully, in a sinister way. His first interactions are all designed to look innocent, even paternal. He asks about her health, her studies. He speaks with a smooth authority, making sure others in the court see him acting like a concerned relative, a responsible guardian of the young empress.
Just putting on a show.
Entirely. Then he gets more direct, more personal. He starts accidentally bumping into her during her walks in the palace gardens. These weren't casual chats. He'd lecture her, apparently.
Lecture her? About what?
Oh, the history of the palace, the meaning behind the statues, the stories of previous emperors, using his impressive erudition, making history sound like entertainment, but really positioning himself as the knowledgeable, authoritative figure in her life now that Alexios was fading.
Grooming her, essentially. And then came gifts.
Small, carefully chosen things. An ivory comb, a silk scarf in the imperial purple color, illuminated prayer books but featuring Orthodox saints. Each gift wasn't just a trinket, it was a marker. A subtle claim of ownership, delivered with notes in his elegant handwriting, the handwriting of a man used to giving orders.
And while this is happening, the atmosphere around Agnes in the palace is changing.
Dramatically, it's like everyone gets the memo. Servants who used to rush to help her now respond with reluctant delay. The palace guards, whose loyalty has clearly shifted to Andronikos, offer just shallow nods instead of proper deference. The power shift is happening visibly, tangibly, around her.
Even her education changes.
Yes, and this is maybe the most chilling part. Her tutors, obviously acting under new instructions, start introducing new topics. Lessons specifically about imperial succession laws, formal prayers for the dying, and crucially, vocabulary related to death, inheritance, and remarriage.
They're preparing a 12-year-old girl for widowhood in her next role.
Exactly. It's political conditioning disguised as tutoring. Then, inevitably, Alexios II dies, September 1183. The official cause is fever, but the whispers say Andronikos hurried things along. Agnes is 12 years old, a widow.
Andronikos doesn't waste a moment.
No. He immediately consolidates power, declares himself Emperor Andronikos I, and the announcement about Agnes, his intention to marry her.
How is that handled, a formal proposal?
Not even close. It's mentioned almost casually during a palace feast, like an administrative detail. Oh, and by the way, I'll be marrying the Dowager Empress. As if she were just another piece of state property, listed alongside the imperial regalia and the treasury accounts.
And the court's reaction. Any outrage.
Yeah.
A 60-year-old man marrying the 12-year-old widow of the emperor he just replaced.
Nothing significant. That's what's so stark. The mathematics of power, as the source puts it, made the union seem logical, even necessary to them. Political expediency trumped everything. Nobody, absolutely nobody, asked Agnes what she thought. Her opinion was irrelevant.
So the second wedding happens. Quickly.
Very quickly. October 1183, just weeks after Alexios' death. And the preparations this time, they had a different feel. Less about dynastic union, more about conquest and possession.
How so?
Agnes has moved into new imperial apartments. Larger, yes, more luxurious silk hangings, mosaics, but they felt, the sources imply, like a beautiful prison. More guards, more attendants who were essentially spies. Less freedom, more effective isolation.
And the ceremony itself.
She walks down the aisle again. Andronikos is waiting, clad in imperial purple. His expression isn't joy, it's satisfaction. The sources describe his dark eyes following her approach with satisfaction that made her stomach clench. She knew exactly what was happening this time.
She understood the Greek now.
Oh, yes. And the words offered no comfort. She was being consecrated as the usurper's prize.
And the ring, the second wedding ring.
This one fit her 12-year-old hand. But psychologically, the sources suggest it felt both lighter and more oppressive than the first oversized one. Lighter because it fit, maybe. More oppressive because she understood the crushing reality it represented.
Which leads us to the reality of medieval consummation. The sources are quite direct about this.
They are. And we need to be too, I think, to understand the full brutality of her situation. The wedding night wasn't a celebration. It was Agnes's true introduction to what marriage meant in this context. A brutal education in powerlessness.
Andronikos wasn't exactly known for his gentleness.
He approached it, apparently, with the same calculating ruthlessness he applied to politics. It was about establishing dominance, securing his claim legally and physically. It wasn't about intimacy, it was about possession.
And the aftermath was just as cold and clinical.
Disturbingly so. The sources mention palace physicians being required to examine Agnes the next morning.
To confirm consummation.
Yes, to provide biological proof that the marriage was legally binding, reducing this incredibly traumatic experience for a child to biological data suitable for political calculation. Any shred of personal dignity, privacy, just erased. Her body was now officially state property, secured for the new regime. #Tech6. Survival, fall, and legacy.
So Agnes is now empress for the second time, married to the ruthless Andronikos. What was life like during his reign? It wasn't long, was it?
No, only about 2 years, from 1183 to 1185, and it was, by all accounts, a reign of terror mixed with incompetence. He was brilliant at seizing power, not so great at actually ruling.
What went wrong?
Well, he alienated pretty much everyone. His attempts at reform often backfired. He drained the treasury further, but mostly it was his paranoia. It just grew and grew.
Leading to?
Purges, executions, exiles, confiscation of property. He saw enemies everywhere, real and imagined. The court lived in constant fear.
And Agnes, how did she navigate this? She's maybe 13, 14 years old.
She learned to survive. It required incredible self-control, attending state functions, watching her husband deal with foreign ambassadors, sometimes brutally. She had to become a master of the blank expression. The sources say she retreated into internal silence, meaning she showed nothing, modulated every word, every glance, because any unguarded reaction, any hint of disapproval, or even just independent thought could be misinterpreted by Andronikos and trigger his infamous temper. She survived by making herself almost invisible, a perfect, passive imperial mask.
While the empire itself was falling apart around them.
Faster than ever. His tyranny fueled rebellion. Provincial governors, seeing the chaos in the capital, just declared independence. The economy worsened. Unrest started simmering among the ordinary people of Constantinople.
So she must have seen it all happening. This lavish ship sinking, and she's trapped on board.
Absolutely. Fully aware, but totally powerless. And then the end came. Violently. September 1185.
The popular uprising.
Yes. The anger in the city finally exploded. Agnes would have heard it from inside the palace, the sounds of the mob, breaking glass, splintering wood doors, the roar of angry crowds.
And Andronikos.
His death was gruesome. The mob captured him, dragged him through the streets, subjected him to horrific torture and humiliation before finally killing him. A truly brutal end.
Did Agnes witness it?
Thankfully, no. The sources indicate she was spared the final moments, but she would have heard it. The sounds of that mob justice were unmistakable, echoing through the palace, a terrifying soundtrack to the end of her second marriage.
So at 14 years old, she's a widow. Again, what happens now? Who's in charge?
A new emperor emerges from the chaos, Isaac II, Angelos, and he immediately has an Agnes problem. What do you do with the French princess, the twice-widowed empress, the living symbol of the regime that just got overthrown?
Killing her seems risky.
Very risky. It would anger France and potentially other Western powers whose support Isaac might need. But keeping her around is also awkward, a constant reminder of Andronikos.
So what's the solution?
House arrest, basically. She's kept confined within the palace complex, treated respectfully but watched closely. Still a political pawn, even now. While frantic diplomatic negotiations took place behind the scenes to arrange her safe return to France.
And she does eventually get back.
Yes, in 1186, after months of uncertainty. But it wasn't like a happy homecoming, the sources are clear. She arrived back in France feeling foreign in her own homeland.
How so, after only about 6 or 7 years away?
Those were incredibly formative, traumatic years. She'd spent more of her conscious memory in the Byzantine court than in France. She apparently spoke Greek more easily than French by then.
And her personality? Her manner?
She carried herself differently. That formal, reserved dignity drilled into her in Constantinople, that Byzantine court culture. It probably seems stiff, maybe even cold, compared to the French court style. And just think what she'd seen. 2 child marriages, illness, death, usurpation, mob violence.
She wasn't a 15-year-old girl anymore. Not really.
Not psychologically. There was this huge gap between her lived experience and that of her French contemporaries. She was granted an estate, allowed to keep the courtesy title Dowager Empress, but she seems to have lived a very quiet, obscure life.
Did she ever marry again?
No. The sources indicate she never remarried. She just lived quietly, managing her affairs, until her death sometime around 1220, largely forgotten by the centers of power.
But there's one final kicker to her story, a devastating irony.
There is. Living quietly in France, Agnes lived long enough to hear the news from 1204.
The Fourth Crusade.
Exactly. The crusade that went completely off the rails and ended up not fighting Muslims in the Holy Land, but sacking Christian Constantinople instead.
The very city she had been sent to rule. Destroyed by Westerners, by Latins like herself.
The news must have hit her incredibly hard. The empire she was sacrificed for, the place of her trauma, utterly devastated. And that cathedral, the Hagia Sophia, where she stood as an 8-year-old bride, desecrated, looted, violated by the Crusaders.
Her entire ordeal, her suffering, rendered completely pointless by the actions of her own people, effectively.
It's the ultimate bitter postscript to her life. The alliances failed, the empire collapsed, and her sacrifice achieved nothing in the end. #tag outro. So when you look back at Agnes's life, the whole arc of it really does just crystallize what we were talking about at the start. That phrase, the brutal mathematics of medieval political marriage, it's not an exaggeration.
No, it's chillingly accurate. Her story is almost a perfect case study. You see exactly how these huge political and economic forces just crushed individual human dignity, reduced it to an asset, something to be quantified, traded.
Her entire existence was shaped, reshaped, constantly reorganized by powerful men, her father, court officials, Andronicos, who saw her only as a strategic asset, not as a person who deserved any say in her own life.
Right. Every single major event, her education, her first marriage, her second marriage, even her eventual return, it was all driven by cold, hard political calculation, not by any concern for her well-being.
And you know, while the specifics of dynastic marriage like this belong to the past, the underlying cruelty, that feels depressingly familiar, the sources themselves hint at this, that this kind of exploitation of the vulnerable continues.
Yeah, maybe hidden behind different justifications today, economic need, cultural norms, political instability. But whether you're talking about child marriage in certain parts of the world or human trafficking, it's still about powerful interests disregarding the autonomy and basic humanity of the less powerful.
Yeah.
That core dynamic hasn't changed.
It really hasn't.
Which brings us to, I guess, our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. Think about the sheer futility of it all in Agnes's case. Her childhood, her innocence, her safety, all traded for this grand Franco-Byzantine alliance.
An alliance that, let's be honest, brought France very little actual benefit in the long run.
Exactly. And she served briefly as empress of an empire that completely imploded, destroyed within 25 years of her first wedding there. So the question is stark. Was any of that suffering, the fear, the isolation, the trauma she endured, was any of it worth the political goals it was sent to achieve?
Historically, the answer seems pretty clear. A resounding no. The personal cost was immense, horrific. The political gains were negligible, fleeting, ultimately meaningless.
So we leave you with that image we started with. That frightened 8-year-old girl standing at the altar in that vast cathedral, and that absurdly large wedding ring on her finger, a weight, symbolic, and maybe even real, that she carried with her in one form or another, probably until her final breath finally released her.